Good evening, everybody, and welcome to PRONI, and welcome to the second lecture in our series of 7 lectures on exploring local history. For those of you who were here last month, I have the good fortune to tell you that the video of the previous lecture is now available online, and you can find that on YouTube, and you can search by PRONI online, and I should bring it up. It's in 6 different places, so feel free to all go home and relive the experience. Tonight's talk is going to be by Olwyn, Purdue. I'm going to change the format slightly different than last week. Olwyn will be speaking for 40-45 minutes. Then Janice will update on our local history project. And then I'm standing in for Anne McVeigh, and I'll demonstrate a few books that we have within our collections, some of which you may see displayed at the table at the other end. Okay, I'll pass you on to Olwyn.
Thanks, Stephen. It's lovely to be here at this end of things, having spent so many years immersed in those very books in the old Public Record Office. And really what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is the results of the research that I did there. I was working on a research project, which examined regional aspects of the Irish poor law, which ties in very well to our local history theme. The sort of things that I would have been looking at would have been the fortnightly meetings, the minutes of the boards of guardians, which were responsible for administering the poor law, and most importantly, from the point of view of local history, as I say, the actual admission books to workhouses, which are very, very useful from the point of view of anybody interested in local history. There's a lot of other records as well that can be used depending on your particular area of interest, but my focus was really on building up a picture of poverty and welfare in a particular locality, particularly during the latter half of the 19th century, looking at who was responsible for administering welfare, how effectively did they do this, who were the poor in a particular area, and how did they negotiate the various options open to them. Did this change over time, and in particular, what role did the workhouse play in local society? As a result of the project I did, I looked really at 4 different poor law unions within Ulster. I looked at Ballymena, Ballycastle, Clogher and Belfast. And tonight what I'm going to do is focus particularly on Ballymena, again to give you a flavour of how research on the poor law can help build up a picture of any particular locality. Just an idea of some of the sources that I used. In conjunction with the poor law records, newspapers are also a very, very good source of information about a particular poor law area, because an awful lot of the minutes are quite dry. But if you want a real record of what happened in some of the Board of Guardians meetings, the newspaper is the place to go for the really juicy information. Okay, so what about the workhouse then? Well, it certainly lingers in popular memory as something of fear, of trepidation. A lot of literature about the workhouse, a lot of artwork relating to the workhouse captures that sense of fear, of somewhere that people don't want to be. The workhouse ceased to exist as an institution almost 100 years ago, and yet it still does have that place in popular memory. Lots of people have personal knowledge of people who even today wouldn't go to a particular hospital because it used to be the workhouse, and there's still within the older generations that fear of the workhouse. John O'Connor, in his history of the Irish workhouse, described it as the most hated and feared institution in Ireland. Now, how did the workhouse come to be in Ireland? Well, for the origins of the poor law and the workhouse, we need to go right back to the early 19th century. At that stage, there was no legal requirement to provide any form of welfare for the poor in Ireland. The relief of poverty depended very much on churches and local philanthropic organisations. But the reality was that most people at the poorest levels of society were in a state of abject destitution. The question of poverty and how to deal with it was at the centre of a great deal of debate, particularly at the beginning of the 19th century. The question that taxed politicians and philosophers and thinkers alike was what impact would it have on society if you were to introduce it as a legal requirement that the poor had to be provided with relief. The big fear was that this would have a demoralising effect, that if people could just get relief as they needed it, nobody would ever work again. Others argued, however, that state provision of poor relief was essential in preventing destitution, preventing starvation, and reducing poverty and disorder. In England, the debate culminated in the passing of the New English Poor Law in 1834. And this was built on systems for the relief of the poor that had existed in England for several hundred years. But it changed things. It created a system whereby the ratepayers of each union would pay for the relief of the poor in that union. And a network of workhouses across the country where the poor would find food and shelter in return for manual labour was established. It also created for the first time the class of people known as the pauper, the person who was dependent on the state for their welfare. And it devised what was called the workhouse test. Now, at this stage, most of the population could probably have been described as poor. So the workhouse test was there to ensure that only the absolute destitute, those with no alternative, would actually seek relief. The idea was that they would receive food and shelter of the most basic type in return for hard manual labour. And this was to be the only form of relief granted. It was to be in the workhouse. And that would therefore reduce the number of people actually applying for relief. The idea was that conditions would be so bad that nobody would willingly seek relief in the workhouse, and the shame of being labelled as a pauper would also act as a deterrent. Well, that was all very well in England, but then there was a lot of debate as to whether that would work in Ireland. In Ireland there had been no system of relief whatsoever. There had never been any system of taxation for the poor, and the local charities and organisations that did try to alleviate poverty had only ever managed to deal with a tiny fraction of the problem. Poverty was growing at an alarming rate, and it was very publicly growing as well. The question was, though, was the poor law the best way of dealing with the situation? The problem was that destitution in Ireland was getting completely out of hand. Visitors to the country, people who went away and wrote about what they saw, wrote about the extent of destitution. It was also having an effect in British cities because people were so poor in Ireland that they were actually moving to England, to the cities in search of work, and therefore they were creating more competition for work there. And the increase in poverty was also responsible for escalating problems of law and order that created headaches for successive British administrations. So if destitution could be reduced, they argued, so would the lawlessness in the countryside. So eventually, after years of reports, inquiries and debates as to whether poor law would work in Ireland, the workhouse system that had been established in England was introduced to Ireland in 1838 as the Irish Poor Law. The architect of the system, Sir George Nichols, was sent to Ireland to make sure that the Irish Poor Law was properly implemented. Within a remarkable 4 years, by 1842, the system was up and running. Ireland was divided into 130 poor law unions. In each of these, a workhouse had been opened or was under construction in the principal town. A board of guardians was appointed to administer the poor law in each of the unions, and they did so under the direction of a central authority in the form of the Poor Law Commissions. And here we have a map of the poor law unions in Ireland at the time, just to give you an idea of how intricate and how many of them there were. Now, as I say, the whole idea of the workhouse was that it was designed to deter. We're going to think about life in the workhouse for a moment. The first thing that put people off going in was the fact that they were always under supervision, that workhouse officials would always be watching, whether you were at work, whether you were at rest, or whether you were exercising. They were designed in such a way to facilitate the supervision of the paupers. Paupers were also classified when they entered the workhouse. They were categorised into one of 7 different groups. And People in the 19th century were very focused on classifying everything that moved, and paupers were no exception. So there were male, female, children of different age categories, the able-bodied, the non-able-bodied, and so on. And finally, they were segregated. As soon as you were admitted, the workhouse again was devised in such a way to keep everybody separate from everybody else. So you'd have men at one side, women on another side, and children in a separate part altogether. So families, when they entered the workhouse, were immediately split up. And as you can see, that's a plan of a workhouse, and you can see the building in the centre with the 4 exercise yards. So women would have had exercise separate from men, and again children separate again, and then upstairs would have been where the children would have slept. Now this is the Braid Valley Hospital in Ballymena. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with it, but this was the workhouse in Ballymena, and one of the things that you'll see was very familiar and characterised so many workhouse buildings were these very, very high, imposing and rather off-putting gable ends that are intimidating for anybody that wanted to enter. That's the other side, so there would have been very often 2 of these great big gable ends and a straight part in the middle then. Now this Antrim workhouse no longer exists, but this is Antrim Fever Hospital, which you can still see today. It's quite alarming actually that the burial ground for the Fever Hospital is apparently under the meat counter in Tesco. Put me off my memory there completely. So when you went into the workhouse, the fundamental principle was that you didn't get anything for nothing. That was complete anathema to the 19th century politicians. Able-bodied paupers were made to work for roughly about 10 hours every day. And these are some of the things that they would have been doing. For men, breaking stones was a great job. The idea was that not only was it to be hard manual labour, but it was also to be unsatisfying. There was nothing to show for it at the end. So men would have been breaking stones for the roads. Women were very often sent to work at picking oakum. Now what that was actually, if you imagine big ship's ropes that are no longer in use, they actually would have picked those apart, and the fibres would have been used as a type of wadding, a bit like sort of an earlier version of cotton wool really. So that's what a lot of the women would do. A lot of them also cleaning and ironing, doing laundry, etc. as well. The diet then on which this work was done, for a healthy adult male, you can see there what the diet would have been for any one day. Now you can imagine doing 10 hours of hard manual labour on that. So what about administering the workhouse? Who was responsible? Well, first and foremost, the Board of Guardians. And the Board of Guardians was made up of 2 groups of people. Some were elected and some were ex officio, or they were appointed. 2/3 of the Guardians were elected, 1/3 appointed. The appointed ones, the ex officio ones, were generally the landlords, the local elites, the JPs, etc. But to be elected as a guardian, you had to be a ratepayer. They met once a fortnight in the boardroom in the workhouse, and they made decisions as to how the poor laws should be administered in their union. Every Board of Guardian had to have 3 officers. The chairman, the vice chairman and the deputy vice chairman. And again, right up until the end of the 19th century, in most unions throughout Ireland, these would have been members of the landed class. So here we have Ballymena Workhouse itself. It's no longer there, and it's now a nice housing development. But in March 1842, Ballymena Workhouse was formally declared fit for purpose. It was built to hold 700 people, with the capacity to squeeze in 1,000 if absolutely necessary. And a few years later, the Fever Hospital was built in the workhouse grounds for people with infectious diseases. Now, when I went to look at the workhouse and the role of the workhouse in Ballymena, there were 3 things I really wanted to establish. First of all, what part did the workhouse play for the people of Ballymena? Not just the poor, but the people in general. Who were the people that administered the workhouse, and in what way were they special or different from people who administered Coleraine or Limavady or Antrim? And finally, and perhaps most importantly, who were the people who actually used the workhouse?